Which book changed your life, and which book do you wish you had written? Those are two of the questions in the History Book Buffs 3-book challenge. And in this episode, we'll be asking each other the questions. I'm Antonia Senior, I'm a writer and critic, and I'm joined by Roger Moorhouse, the top historian. So don't forget, follow, like, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube for all the best chat about history books. So, Roger Moorhouse, we are both home again after having been for a few days at the absolutely incredible Chalk History Festival. And YouTube viewers can see our video of our time there on YouTube, obviously, because I just said YouTube viewers.
Yeah, it was wonderful. Wonderful weekend. You know, lots of history. A few beers we had, and lots of really interesting talks. And we were doing our guerrilla interviews, which went very well. So yeah, we had a great time, didn't we?
We did. So we did, as our guerrilla interviews, we did a 3-book challenge, which we set to various brilliant and famous historians. And as I say, if you're listening to this on the podcast, the place to find those videos and the full recap of our brilliant adventures at Chalk is on our YouTube channel at History Book Buffs. But what we thought we would do in this follow-up edition of our both audio and video podcast is set ourselves the 3-book challenge that we went around Chalk setting to the various historians. I would just say that I think my favourite answers were probably James Holland's. His was very good. Yeah.
There were some really thoughtful and, dare I say, even quite philosophical. I thought Peter Caddick-Adams was very, philosophical in his answers. So yeah, I thought it's a really interesting little exercise. Actually,
I agree. So we're going to do it on each other. So
right,
Roger Moorhouse, this is your 3-book challenge. Okay, first question. Which book changed your life?
There are a few, I'll be honest, but I think if I'm going to pin one down, it would probably be Alan Bullock's Hitler: A Study in Tyranny, which came out in, I don't know, mid-1950s. It was one of those sort of first biographies of Hitler.
So were you there when it was published? Have you got a first edition?
Yeah, I was at the launch party, funnily enough. Gosh, jeez. I mean, I picked it up. I mean, as you know, my path to becoming a historian was a rather twisted one. So I picked it up. I was doing A-level history way back in the day, and doing modern European, but I did a lot of modern German. And I remember picking that up at the time, and just ended up sort of reading it for pleasure, because it is really beautifully written. And I suppose it's a book that showed to me, I suppose, opened my eyes to how elegantly written and how beautifully written it could be, and yet still be serious history. Yeah. So to me it's like one of those sort of perfect examples of popular history, because it ticks all the boxes. It's reliable history, and yet you'd read it for pleasure. You read a passage and go, oh my, that's beautiful. You couldn't imagine how it would be better done. I mean, there are others at different sort of turning points, but I think that was probably one of the first ones that really opened my eyes to like I say, what history could be. And of course, it pushed me in that direction, which I've never really let go of having a fascination with Nazi Germany. So, that's all part and parcel of it as well. So, Alan Bullock's Study in Tyranny.
Brilliant. So, if you hadn't read that, do you think you would be a professional historian?
It's a good question. I mean, there are other ones at the time. So another one at that time that I picked up was Richard Grunberger's Social History of the Third Reich, for the same reason, because that's the stuff that I was studying, and that was a similar thing, because that was like you wouldn't pick that book up and say, oh, that looks fun. right? But it genuinely is. Like, it's a really funny book, and he brings a lot of sort of wry humour into it. So again, that sort of served the same purpose. I think it's possible. Like, if I'd ended up, I mean, I'd left school. I left school when I was 16, and then I was working, doing various jobs, and then I ended up doing an A level, and well, I'd done some sort of study, and then I thought I quite like doing that. It's like I was ready to do some study, right? I never
Yeah.
was at school. I was never that interested. And then when I had to do this professional qualification, which I did, and then I thought I quite enjoyed that. I quite enjoyed the experience of learning and, and reading and all of that. So I thought I'll just carry on. And I thought, what did I like at school? And I came up with, well, like, the subject I hated least was probably history. So I thought I'll do modern history A level, and it was like a year's course. It was 1 hour a week, local FE college. So really, I mean, it was kind of low level stuff, and I just loved it. And I used to, write all the essays for homework and things like that, which kind of astonished my tutor or lecturer, because I don't think anyone had ever done that in his class before. So he was kind of dumbfounded. And I was actually reading the texts, which are ditto. I don't think anyone had ever read the text that he suggested before. So yeah, it was kind of, the whole thing was just revelatory. And I suppose if you're going to talk about turning points, if I hadn't hit upon, modern German, particularly the Third Reich, and, modern European, if I'd ended up doing like medieval history, maybe I would have loved that just as much. But, there's a possibility that wouldn't have, lit the lamp. So
Yeah.
it's a difficult one. But I think that was certainly, those two books are ones that absolutely stick out for me from that period, because it was exactly that. It was fascinating, it was informative, and it was, so well written, with a sort of lightness and with a dash of humour. I just thought, wow, this is what history can be.
Yeah, amazing. So history's gain is car engines lost.
Yes, very, very much. I mean, the car engine's lost that was already lost way before that. I was actually working on the docks at that point. I was working on Portsmouth docks at that point. So it's Portsmouth docks loss that the history's gain.
I'm sure the docks are still mourning.
I think they are. They're still in mourning, most definitely. Yeah. So what about you? Which one changed your life?
Okay, well, you're going to think that I'm blowing smoke up your ass, but it was Devil's Alliance by Roger Moorhouse.
Come on, you've said this before.
True.
Go on then. Tell me why.
True. But listen, but mainly because of, I guess, a parallel but shadow inverse reason from yours. So I was very good at history at school. I was really swotty. I loved it. I got into Cambridge. I did history there. It was completely wasted on me because I had the most amazing lecturers and supervisors. I mean, I was learning history from Christopher Clark and Orlando Figes, like, in the person, and it was completely wasted on me. And I mean,
as well.
Sorry?
Helen Castor, of course, as well.
Helen Castor. Yeah, all these amazing people. And like, I was sort of up for it, but also mainly I was up for, drinking and other things, and, Carousing, right. So after I left Cambridge, my sort of interest in history was still there, and I still read history, but like, not exclusively and not wholly, and I was very fiction oriented, and I went off and I worked as a journalist for many years, and then I read, I guess it was before COVID, couple of years before COVID, maybe, I'd met you somewhere, I think, at a dinner or something, and so I decided to read one of your books, and I picked up Devil's Alliance, and I can remember it. I was camping, and I was reading Devil's Alliance in a field and I couldn't put it down. And it was completely revelatory because it made me completely revise two opinions that I'd had. One was that writing history was not for me because it wasn't creative, and it was dry, and it was kind of dusty, and I'd left that behind, and it wasn't really my thing, and I was a historical fiction person, a failing historical fiction person, but that was who I was. So it made me completely rethink that, because it was so readable and narratively pacey and fascinating. And I thought, my gosh, this is what popular narrative history can do. And the second thing it did was completely revolutionise my understanding of World War II and who won the war, because I hadn't done very much World War II history at that point, and I hadn't really thought very hard about what it felt like at the war's end if you were standing in Poland, or if you were standing in Lithuania, or if you were standing anywhere else other than in London or New York, right?
Yeah.
And that idea that we didn't win the war, Stalin won the war, was like a sledgehammer to the head. And then combined also with my realization from your book that the Nazi-Soviet pact had been completely misunderstood and completely underplayed and revisionist and revised based on Stalin's own propaganda. It was like mind-blowing. And I just remember lying in this field surrounded by squealing children and having water pistol fights and the fire crackling and doubtless drinking a few beers by the tent and just having a sort of Damascene kind of...
Wow. I mean, that was mainly the beer speaking, right? I mean, must be. But no, that's a lovely thing, and it's a lovely thing to hear because you do want people to engage with what you write. Of course, you do, and you want them to. Yeah, I mean, in an ideal case, you want people to go, "Oh my God, I hadn't thought about it like that," or just to engage with a passage and say that's beautifully written or whatever it is. So that's absolutely what we all want, isn't it, as writers, is to get 100%. That sort of reaction. So it's absolutely lovely to hear it. Yeah, completely.
Yeah. Well, it's all true. It blew my mind. And I've obviously read everything else that you've written, apart from Berlin at War, which I feel like I don't know why I've got a problem with Berlin at War. I'm never going to read it.
Well, you haven't read it, though, you're saying. So, yeah, and it's not like you've read it and you've got a problem with it. There's got some weird that you don't want to read it or something.
I don't want to read it.
Yeah, okay.
I don't know why. I feel like there might be just too many stories of mothers with their starving children at the end of the war. I can't.
Right. Yeah. It's too visceral, too close, maybe.
Yeah, too good. Moorhouse. That's the problem. It might be too good.
Too good. That's exactly the thing. It's too good. Too good. Well, maybe one day you'll come around to it. You'll see. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a lovely thing. Thank you. You're very kind.
All right, Roger. Second question.
Yeah.
Which book do you wish that you had written?
That one's quite easy for me, and it relates a bit to my or your previous answer, Devil's Alliance. The book I wish I had written would be Tim Snyder's Bloodlands, because not only does it fulfill all the sort of criteria that I mentioned before about being, beautifully written, informative, bang on, reliable. It's also, illuminating a period and an area of the world that Central and Eastern Europe, which I'm fascinated by anyway, that I don't think gets talked about enough. He does it in a brilliant way, in a way that he combines the horrors inflicted by the Nazis with the horrors inflicted by the Soviets, and he does so in such a way that there's kind of no gainsaying that. I mean, it's a fashionable thing, obviously, to damn the Nazis, and rightly so, but still Stalin tends to get a free pass, still now in 2025, which is kind of baffling. He doesn't do that. He doesn't allow that. And he does it with such authority and such elegance that there's no contradiction. And I think it's a brilliant book. I think it's brilliantly done. And that would be the one for me. And I think it sold well. I think it did. It's not for commercial reasons. One of the answers we got with our 3-book challenge, Al Murray said straight away, "Which book do you wish you'd written?" He said Stalingrad for the sales, and that is a fair argument. You can't. I mean, I think Bloodlands did well, but it's not for that reason. It's purely because of what it represents, which is a really thoughtful, thoroughgoing, absolutely authoritative treatment of a subject that is very thorny and prickly, and yet he negotiates it really, really well. And it's fascinating.
I agree. I love the book. Brilliantly written. I guess my only issue with it is I think there is a legitimate counter argument about his handling of it all, which is that he slightly sort of manipulates territory and timings in order to kind of, make the case that this was all part of like one great sort of bloodshed that was imposed by both sides of the political spectrum. But what he also does in doing that is create a moral equivalency between Nazism and communism.
Yeah.
And we've talked about this in the sense that obviously I agree with you that giving communism a free ride is anathema. But I think there is a slight danger with the moral equivalency position. And also I agree with you that, like, if you're being shot in the head, right, you don't really care whether it's because you've fallen foul of Nazi strictures or communist strictures, right? If you're a kulak or a Jew, you're still dead because of an ideology that you didn't vote for, right?
Yeah.
So yes, but the issue is that there is something specifically morally abhorrent about a project that was designed to eradicate an entire race of people. And that wasn't what Stalin was doing, right? I mean, I'm not excusing him, I'm not whatever, but it wasn't what he was doing. Whereas that was what Hitler was doing. It was a specifically abhorrent crime that I think we have to be quite careful of sort of just wrapping up as another genocide in a genocidal era. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does, and I agree up to a point. I agree with the point about the Holocaust being, again, I would say even now, uniquely horrific, even alongside other genocides. You look at Rwanda, you look at Cambodia. I would still say it's unique in its horror, and it's partly, again, a lot of this stuff is horribly unfashionable now to say, but it's partly because of the civilizational level that Germany was at. They're at a level where they should have known better, essentially. And yet they were seduced, enough of them were seduced either to go along with it or to actively, be perpetrators. So I would agree that there is a uniqueness to that. That does set it apart. But then again, what Snyder does, I think, very well is to, yes, I don't think he's not trying to, minimize the Holocaust by as you say, sort of rolling it in with the other horrors. I would say the opposite. But I think that approach, I think there's a danger. I'm trying to phrase this properly. I think there's a danger in a sense pulling the Holocaust out of that wider narrative and looking at it, almost to an obsessive level, and forgetting about everything else, forgetting about the kulaks, forgetting about the Holodomor, forgetting about the other horrors that the Nazis perpetrated. I mean, there's 6 million Polish dead, for example, 3 million of whom are Polish Jews. There's another 3 million Poles killed by the Nazis. It's phenomenal numbers. So there's a danger, I think, in focusing on the Holocaust at the expense of everything else. And I think that's what he does very well, is that he does put it all back together and puts it back into its wider context. And it is extremely bloody. So I think there's arguments both sides on that. But this is why I say it's a very thorny issue. Not only that juxtaposition of Stalinism and Nazism, but also that question that you just raised about where the Holocaust fits within that. And that's why I say it's all very ticklish. And he actually navigates it all very, very well with tremendous sensitivity. And I think also tremendous authority. So again, I see your caveat, but I still think it stands up.
Okay.
What about you? Which book do you wish you had written?
So this changes a lot, but the current one I wish I'd written is by an American writer with a ridiculous name, Hampton Sides.
That is ridiculous.
And it is ridiculous, I know. But I love his books, and it's The Wide, Wide Sea, and it's the third voyage of Captain Cook. Now, the
Yes.
reason I completely love this, well, there are a couple of reasons. So one is that I am, as you know, totally and utterly and completely obsessed with the novels of Patrick O'Brian. So I've read all of the Aubrey Maturin novels. There's like 21 of them. I've read the whole series about 6 times. Some of the
Wow.
books multiple times. I adore them, but there's literally no point me saying I wish I'd written Aubrey and Maturin, because like that's like a snail wishing they were an elephant, right? It's just stupid. I've also discovered in the course of writing a non-fiction book that I think I'm actually better at non-fiction than fiction. And I think I'm really good at writing narrative non-fiction, and well, everybody else will be able to judge that next year when my book comes out.
Yeah.
But I would, so the Hampton Sides book is about the third voyage of Captain Cook, and it's
non-fiction, to clarify.
It's non-fiction. It's narrative non-fiction. It is completely and utterly absorbing. It's based on really good research. It's so immersive, and it's the story of the whole crew as they kind of as they travel to the furthest reaches of the world, and Cook is in terrible pain, and he's getting more and more like grumpy and self-lacerating, and then their relationships with the native peoples that they meet along the way kind of change and become dark, and the kind of narrative propulsion of it as a non-fiction thriller, I guess, is just exquisite, and his characterization is extraordinary. Honestly, I adore Hampton Sides. I love him, and I've read a number of his now. It's quite similar to David Grann's The Wager, which did really well last year. Lots of people read that. And The Wager, actually, I was tempted to do that. So there's a Patrick O'Brian sequence of 2 novels, his lesser read novels, which obviously I've read too multiple times, which are about the same voyage that The Wager is based on, Commodore Anson's voyage to the South America. Again, really good book, but over the 2 of them, Hampton Sides just edges it. And also, like, I just think just being called Hampton Sides, he gets brownie points.
He gets points for that. You're talking about the sort of maritime stuff. Reminds me of a book I read a long time ago, which stuck in my mind, which was Batavia's Graveyard by Mike Dash. Have you ever seen that?
I know of it. Yeah, yes.
So that was a Dutch was it an East Indiaman that was sort of shipwrecked off the Australian west coast, somewhere near Geraldton on the coast of West Australia, which would have been, they would effectively have discovered Australia because it was that early, so it's pre-Cook. And I remember reading that, and again the records, what records there must have been from the Dutch East India Company, where he must have mined them very effectively. But absolutely brilliant book. But it sounds like it's in a similar sort of vein.
Yeah.
So that's definitely worth a look. Batavia's Graveyard. But I'll look up Hampton Sides as well.
Yeah, you should. He's wonderful. I just to sort of emphasize my obsession with all like this kind of stuff, I actually did a couple of tall ship voyages when I was younger, just because I'd read so much Hornblower and so much Patrick O'Brian that I needed to know what it was like to sail on a kind of old school proper rigged ship, and it was amazing. I mean,
and did
climbing
that
up the
add
top
to your fascination or detract? How did it interact with it?
Completely added to it. It was amazing, because apart from anything else, it is so terrifying climbing up to the top of the mainmast and inching out along the royals to kind of let loose the sail. And we would do both times I've done it. It was in vaguely reasonable conditions, although actually once around the Azores was quite hairy. And it's still kind of extraordinarily terrifying. The other thing we did, do you remember just recently there was that awful thing with the training ship going straight into the bridge.
Yeah.
And they were all standing out on the yards.
Yeah.
And I found that really moving, because literally one of the highlights of my life is we sailed this tall ship into the harbour in Barbados, and we were manning the yards, and I was standing on top of out on the Tgallant, I think. Really, I was pretty
using
high.
all the lingo here, Senior.
I know, right?
It's very impressive.
Yeah. And so I was out there, and we were all singing Jerusalem
Oh
as
my
we
God.
sail out on the yards as we sailed into the port in Barbados. I mean,
Wow.
probably now we'd be cancelled for colonialists.
I think you probably would. I mean, that's so frightfully British. I think you'd just be taken out and shot, frankly.
Yeah, it was honestly one of the highlights of my life. Anyway,
Brilliant.
there we go.
No, it's
Hampton
lovely.
Sides, the Wide Wide Sea, Captain Cook. Oh, just one more thing to say about it. It's also brilliantly done that you know what's going to happen and yet you can't stop reading. It's incredible.
Yeah,
that's a
a
feat.
good. That's a trick. That's a trick, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
So the third question, Roger Moorhouse.
Yeah.
In your obituary,
Yeah.
which you very kindly said to all our other historians that we interviewed, is many years hence, but I'm not going to qualify it like
Don't
that.
say that with me.
In your obituary, which one of your books do you want to be in the headline?
Well, I suppose the sensible answer, the sort of Peter Caddick Adams answer to that, is very thoughtful. Well, that's for other people to decide. But if it's up to me, I would probably, so far anyway, I would probably say either Devil's Alliance, which we talked about before, or First to Fight, my book about the September campaign. And the reason being, I think particularly with Devil's Alliance, actually both of them, writing a book is, as you know, is a fairly sort of solitary existence anyway. And to some extent, you're just kind of accompanied by, the handful of texts that sort of vaguely cover the same ground, or that they, that you draw on, piecemeal for various points. And the interesting thing with the Devil's Alliance, particularly, was that I didn't really have that. So you felt very much like you were flying solo, and without any instruments. I mean, how do I sort of milk that particular analogy for all it's worth? But it did feel like flying solo with not really understanding the terrain beneath you, and trying to make sense of your malfunctioning instruments. It felt like that. So the fact that what came out, I think, is a book that I'm proud of, and you were very kind to big it up earlier on. That to me sort of means a lot. And to a lesser degree, but the same principle with First to Fight, because that was also, to a large extent, sort of uncharted territory that I was into. Because it's quite, it's relatively easy to write, and you could write yet another book about, Nazi Germany or about the Weimar Republic, because it's been done so many times. You could literally, pull this section from that book and another section from another book, and kind of rewrite them, and add in some a dash of new material, and job done, right? And to be fair, a lot of our fellow historians kind of do that. But I think with those two examples, it really was a bit of an adventure into something like an unknown. In that, there's a relative dearth of materials. You're setting out with certainly in the case of the Devil's Alliance, with an interpretation that was kind of novel. I don't think many people had made the case that I had before. So yeah, so I think probably that one, for all those reasons.
Okay.
What about you?
No, but well, hang on. Before I do me, I note that you had your bets. So basically, you chose two.
Yeah, sorry. Well, I'd say Devil's Alliance then on that basis. I'd say Devil's Alliance. For that reason, I think it was ambitious, and I think I'd like to think I pulled it off.
Well, I mean, I've already said. I think you did. It's a great book. I think I'm going to stop blowing smoke up your ass now, Roger, because because your head might swell to too big for this screen, and then we'd look weird on YouTube. Yeah.
Yeah. So what about you? When your obituary is written, decades hence, obviously, what will be in the headline?
Well, I'm very proud of the 3 fiction books that I had published. I think, as I mentioned earlier on, I think my switch to non-fiction has been like a kind of coming home, and I'm much happier here.
Yeah.
So I a future non-fiction book, perhaps the one that's coming out next April about the Cambridge Five.
Mm-hmm.
But perhaps one down the line. I don't know. I want all I want to do, Roger Moorhouse, is be given sufficient contracts to keep doing this until I die.
Yeah.
So the point at which I do die, hopefully, I will have done a few, and there'll be plenty of choice.
I think that's very. I mean, it is. Like any job, it's it has all of its attendant frustrations, of course. But it's a privilege really to do it, isn't it? It's very enjoyable. I like you. I love the research. I love the act of writing. I love the process of writing, that creative element as well. So when I look back, and I have, to my horror, really, I have been doing this now for 25 years, which kind of sounds. I mean, I don't know quite how that worked. Like, how the hell did that happen? I find that quite baffling. So as I said to someone the other day, I said, it's not an accident. It's looking like a career. And when I always balk at using the word career, because I never feel like it is. It's just what I do. So, but it is an absolute privilege to do it. You're right, and it's a wonderful thing. So I feel the same way. Just roll it on. I'll carry on writing for as long as anyone wants to read me.
That's a lovely thought. Well, I will want to read you, Roger, unless it's Berlin at War, in which case I'm not reading it.
Well,
on that
thanks
note,
anyway.
On that note, we'll catch up next time.
Lovely. Take care. All the best.
Bye.
Bye.